Ruth Winslow's knees hit the frozen ground, not from exhaustion, from surrender, the bundle in her arms. Baby Hope, 6 months old, too quiet for too long, didn't cry anymore. Ruth's fingers, purple with frostbite, couldn't feel if her daughter was still breathing. She whispered to the empty crossroads, "Forgive me." Then hoofbeats. A shadow fell across her. A man's voice, rough as wind through pine. "You planning to die here, or you gonna let me help?" Ruth looked up, into the face of the man who would either save her or destroy her. Before we find out what happens next, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. This story gets darker before the dawn breaks, and you won't want to miss a single moment. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Ruth's story travels. From broken to blessed, from judgment to grace. Now let's go back to where it all began. November 1876, Montana Territory. Ruth had been walking for 3 days straight. Her boots splitting at every seam left bloody prints in the November snow. The shawl wrapped around Baby Hope was so thin it might as well have been made of wishes. And Ruth was fresh out of those. "Just a little further," she whispered to the child in her arms. Hope's eyes stared up at nothing. Not blinking, not crying. Just fading. Ruth knew that look. She'd seen it on her husband's face right before the mine collapsed. Right before the town decided she was cursed. The crossroads appeared like a taunt, 4 directions, all of them leading nowhere. She was welcome. North. The logging camps that wouldn't hire a woman. South. The town that drove her out with stones and scripture. East, more wilderness, more cold, more slow death. West, same as East, just a different flavor of dying. Ruth sank to her knees. Her legs simply stopped obeying. She pulled Hope closer, felt the terrible lightness of her daughter's breathing. "I'm sorry," Ruth said, to Hope, to God, to herself. "I tried." The wind answered with a howl that sounded almost like laughter, then hoofbeats. Ruth didn't look up at first. Couldn't. Shame had made her spine too heavy. The horse stopped 10 feet away, close enough to help, far enough to judge. "You hurt," a man's voice, deep, careful. Ruth shook her head. Lies were easier than truth. "You lost." Now she looked up. The man sat tall in his saddle, not from arrogance, from weariness. Like sitting up straight was the only thing keeping him from collapsing inward. His hat shadowed most of his face, but Ruth could see his jaw. Set hard. Weathered by more than just Montana winters. "Yes," Ruth said. Then, because honesty was all she had left, "But not the way you think." The man studied her, his eyes gray, like a sky that couldn't decide between storm and calm, moved from her face to the bundle in her arms, then back. "How long since that baby ate?" Ruth's throat closed. 2 days, maybe 3. I lost track." The man dismounted in one smooth motion. He moved like water, deliberate, unhurried, inevitable. He pulled a canteen from his saddle, uncorked it, held it out. "Drink first. Can't feed a child if you're dead." Ruth's hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. The man stepped closer, steadied her grip with his own. His hands were huge, calloused, scarred across the knuckles, but gentle. "Slow," he said. "Your stomach ain't gonna trust you right away." The water tasted like life. Ruth forced herself to stop after 4 swallows. "The baby," she said. "Let me see her." Ruth hesitated. Every instinct screamed that men couldn't be trusted. Men took. Men judged. Men left. But Hope was dying. She held out her daughter. The man took Hope with the kind of care Ruth had only seen in women. He cradled her head, checked her breathing, touched her tiny wrist. "She's breathing," he said. "Weak but steady. You got any milk left?" Shame burned hotter than frostbite. "No." It dried up. A week ago. The man nodded like this was just another fact, not a failure. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a small tin. Condensed milk, army ration. Saved my life more than once. He handed it to her. Mix it with warm water. Feed her slow. Little sips. Ruth stared at the tin like it was a holy relic. I can't pay you. Didn't ask you to. I have nothing to give. The man's expression didn't change. Then we're even. I got nothing I need. He turned back to his horse, began adjusting the stirrups. Ruth's voice cracked. Why would you help me? He paused, didn't turn around. Because a long time ago, I needed help and didn't get it. And I've been trying to balance those scales ever since. He swung back into the saddle, then extended a gloved hand down to her. Can you ride? I don't know. I haven't since. That ain't what I asked. Can you climb up here or not? Ruth looked at his hand, looked at Hope, looked at the 4 empty roads. She took his hand. His grip was iron. He pulled her up behind him like she weighed nothing. Ruth settled into the saddle, Hope tucked between her chest and his broad back. Hold on, the man said, and don't let go no matter what. Where are we going? Home. The word hit Ruth like a fist. Home. She'd forgotten what that sounded like. I don't even know your name, she said. Grant McCoy. I'm Ruth Winslow. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Winslow. It's just Ruth, my husband. He's gone. Grant nodded once. Then it's just Grant. He spurred the horse forward. Ruth wrapped one arm around his waist, the other around Hope. For the first time in months, she felt warm. They rode in silence for 20 minutes. The landscape was brutal, endless white, interrupted by skeletal trees, mountains looming like judges in the distance. Ruth finally spoke. How far is your ranch? 2 hours in good weather, 3 in this cold. We'll make it before nightfall. What if we don't? Then we keep riding. His certainty was strange. Ruth had spent so long around people who hesitated, who calculated, who weighed every kindness against potential cost. Grant spoke like helping her was as natural as breathing. You don't know anything about me, Ruth said. Nope. I could be dangerous. Grant's shoulders moved, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. Lady, you're half dead from cold holding a baby that weighs less than a sack of flour. If you're dangerous, I'll take my chances. The town I came from, they said I was cursed. Now Grant did turn his head slightly. Not enough to see her face, just enough that she knew he was listening. That's so. My husband died in a mine collapse. They said I distracted him, made him careless, that I brought ruin to any man who... Her voice broke. They're not wrong. That what you believe, Ruth's silence was answer enough. Grant faced forward again. Well, Mrs. Ruth Winslow, I've been ruined before. Survived it. Figure I can survive it again. The horse plodded on. Snow began to fall soft at first, then harder. Ruth felt Grant's heartbeat against her cheek. Steady, unhurried, like a clock that refused to stop. Why? She whispered. Why would you risk this? Grant was quiet for so long. Ruth thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 2 years ago, my wife died. Childbirth. I was at the lumber mill closing a deal that was going to make us rich. Make her comfortable. She went into labor early, alone. By the time I got home... He stopped, started again. The midwife said if I'd been there, maybe it would have been different. Maybe I could have ridden for the doctor faster. Maybe I could have done something. But I wasn't there. I was choosing money over her. And she died thinking I didn't care enough to show up. Ruth's chest ached. I'm sorry. Me too. But sorry don't bring folks back. So I made myself a promise. Next time someone needs help, I ain't gonna hesitate. I ain't gonna calculate. I'm just gonna do the right thing fast and deal with consequences later. And I'm your consequence. No, ma'am. You're my chance to keep that promise. The snow fell harder now. The world turned white, erasing everything except the narrow path ahead. Ruth closed her eyes and held on. They reached the cabin as darkness swallowed the mountains. Ruth had expected something grand. Grant had mentioned lumber mills, money, success. But the cabin was simple, solid, lonely. It sat in a clearing ringed by pines, smoke curling from the chimney like a ghost trying to escape. A single lamp glowed in the window. Grant dismounted, helped Ruth down. Her legs buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy. You've been riding for 3 hours on an empty stomach. Give yourself a minute." He carried both her and Hope to the door, kicked it open. The interior was warm, clean, heartbreaking. Ruth saw it immediately, the cabin of a man who'd stopped living and started surviving. Everything was functional. Nothing was comfortable. 2 plates sat on a shelf, one worn, one pristine with dust. A woman's shawl hung on a peg near the door, untouched. A rocking chair faced the fireplace, positioned perfectly for someone who would never sit there again. Grant set Ruth down gently in a chair by the fire. He took Hope, laid her on a pile of furs near the hearth. "Stay warm. I'll get food." He moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, heating water, mixing the condensed milk, testing the temperature on his wrist. Every motion was careful, controlled. Like he was afraid if he slowed down, he'd remember how to feel. Ruth watched him feed Hope with a patience that made her throat tight. He tilted the tin cup, let tiny drops fall onto the baby's lips. Hope's eyes fluttered, then opened. She drank. Slow. Weak. But drinking. "She's gonna make it," Grant said. Not a question. A decision. When Hope finally fell asleep, really asleep, not that terrible half-death, Grant turned to Ruth. "Your turn." He handed her a bowl of stew. Venison, potatoes, carrots. Simple food that tasted like heaven. Ruth ate slowly. Every bite felt like betraying her guilt. She didn't deserve this warmth, this kindness, this second chance. Grant sat across from her, drinking coffee from a chipped mug. "You can stay," he said. "Long as you need." Ruth looked up, startled. "I can't." Wasn't a question. "People will talk." "Let 'em. They'll say terrible things about both of us." Grant's expression didn't change. "Mrs. Winslow, Ruth, I stopped caring what people thought the day I buried my wife, and the town told me it was my own fault. If they want to add more sins to my ledger, they're welcome to try." Ruth set down her spoon. "What do you want from me?" "Honestly." "Yes." Grant leaned back, studied the ceiling like it held answers. "I want this place to stop feeling like a grave. I want to hear footsteps that ain't mine. I want to remember what it's like to have someone to talk to at supper." He looked at her then. Really looked. "I want to save you. Because maybe if I do, it'll balance out the one I couldn't save." Ruth's vision blurred. "That's not fair to either of us." "No, but it's honest." They sat in silence. The fire crackled. Hope snored softly. Finally Ruth spoke. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I worked as a laundress before everything. Then I'll pay you wages, room board and $20 a month. Fair. $20 a month was more than fair. It was generous. It was salvation." "Why would you do this?" Ruth asked again. Grant stood, moved to the fireplace. He pulled something from his pocket, a small tin-type photograph. He stared at it for a long moment, then held it out. Ruth took it. Saw a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes smiling at the camera like she had a secret. "Anna," Grant said. "My wife. She always brought home strays. Dogs, cats, injured birds. Drove me crazy. I'd ask her why she kept collecting creatures that couldn't pay her back." He took the photo, put it back in his pocket. She'd say, "Grant, love ain't a transaction. It's a choice. You choose to give it expecting nothing in return. That's what makes it love." His jaw tightened. I didn't understand what she meant until she was gone. Until I realized I'd spent so much time building an empire that I forgot to just choose her every day, without condition. He looked at Ruth. So that's what I'm doing now, choosing to help you. Because Anna would have. And because maybe if I live the way she wanted me to, I'll stop feeling like I failed her. Ruth's tears came fast and silent. She covered her mouth, trying to hold them back. Grant turned away, giving her privacy. The room in the back was Anna's sewing room. It's yours now. I'll bring your things. Wait, you don't got things. No. Then tomorrow we'll ride to town. Get you proper clothes, boots that don't leak, blankets for the baby. Grant, I can't accept. You can, and you will. Because I need this, Ruth. I need to feel like I'm doing something right for once. He moved toward his bedroom door, paused with his hand on the knob. One more thing. If anyone asks, and they will, you're my housekeeper. That's all. I ain't gonna let anyone sully your name or mine by suggesting otherwise. Clear? Clear. Good. Sleep well, Mrs. Winslow. Ruth. He almost smiled. Ruth. The door closed. Ruth sat alone by the fire. Hope sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. She pulled the baby close, buried her face in the soft fuzz of her hair. We made it, she whispered. We're home. But even as she said it, Ruth knew the truth. This wasn't home. This was borrowed time. And borrowed time always ran out. The next morning arrived with brutal cold and brittle sunshine. Ruth woke to the sound of an axe biting wood, steady, rhythmic, relentless. She dressed in her threadbare clothes, wrapped Hope in the cleanest blanket she could find, and stepped outside. Grant was splitting logs in the yard, his breath clouding the air. He'd already built a pyramid of firewood taller than Ruth's head. Mornin', he called without stopping. Coffee's on the stove. Help yourself. Ruth went back inside, poured herself a cup from the battered pot. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it warmed her from the inside out. She fed Hope, changed her using strips of cloth Grant had left on the table, then set about exploring the cabin. It didn't take long. One main room with fireplace, table, and chairs. Grant's bedroom to the left. Her new room, Anna's sewing room, to the right. A root cellar accessed through a trap door in the floor. But it was the details that broke Ruth's heart. The two plates. One used daily, the other gathering dust. The rocking chair positioned perfectly, never used. A woman's hairbrush on a shelf, still holding strands of dark hair. A wedding ring on a leather cord hanging from a nail above Grant's bed. This wasn't a home. It was a shrine. And Ruth was the intruder. Grant came in an hour later, cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. You ready? For what? Mean? Town. Gotta get you supplies. Unless you plan on wearing that dress till it disintegrates. Ruth looked down at her clothes, more patches than original fabric, stained with road dust and failure. I can't go to town. Why not? Because they'll... She stopped. Started again. The last town I was in, they threw rocks, called me a witch, said I killed my husband with my curse. Grant's expression hardened. They throw rocks here, they'll answer to me. Grant, you don't understand. When people decide you're cursed, facts don't matter. Truth don't matter. They see what they want to see. He stepped closer, not threatening, just solid. Then let 'em see me standing next to you. Let 'em see I ain't afraid. You should be. But I ain't. They stared at each other. Ruth saw something in his eyes she'd forgotten existed: belief. Not in God or luck or justice. In her. All right, she whispered. But if this goes bad, it won't. If it does, you let me walk away. Don't defend me. Don't fight for me. Just let me go. Grant's jaw worked. Can't promise that. Then I can't go to town. He exhaled hard, looked at the ceiling, then back at her. Fine. I promise if things go bad, I'll let you walk away. But Ruth, yes. Things ain't gonna go bad, because I won't let 'em. The town was called Silver Ridge. Population 300, judgment capacity infinite. They rode in together, Grant on his horse, Ruth seated behind him with hope. Every eye turned, every conversation stopped. Ruth felt the weight of their stares like hands pressing down on her chest. Grant dismounted in front of the general store, helped Ruth down. She kept her head up, spine straight. If they were going to judge her, they'd do it while she looked them in the eye. The store owner, a thick man with suspicious eyes, watched them enter. "McCoy," he said, no warmth in it. "Barton, need supplies." "What kind?" "Clothes for a lady. Boots, dress shawl. Baby blankets. Flour, sugar, coffee." Barton's eyes slid to Ruth. "This the woman folks been talking about. This is my housekeeper, Mrs. Winslow. She'll be staying at my ranch through winter." Barton's expression said he believed that, like he believed in mermaids. "That's so." "That's so. Now you gonna sell me supplies or stand there gawkin'?" Barton moved slow, gathering items with deliberate skepticism. Ruth held Hope close, trying to make herself small. A woman entered, 50ish, sharp-eyed, dressed in black. "Grant McCoy," she said. "Been a while." "Mrs. Doyle." "Heard you brought home a stray." Grant's shoulders tensed. "I brought home a housekeeper." Mrs. Doyle moved closer to Ruth, studying her like a specimen. "You the widow from Coppertown, the one they ran out?" Ruth's throat closed. She managed a nod. "Heard you got a reputation. Heard men die when you're around." "Martha." Grant's voice dropped to a warning, but Mrs. Doyle wasn't done. "Also heard you birthed that baby on the road, alone, in December, and kept her alive for 6 months with nothing but willpower." Ruth blinked. That wasn't the tone she expected. Mrs. Doyle smiled, not kind but not cruel. Calculating. "Takes a strong woman to survive that. Takes a stronger one to walk into this town knowing what folks will say." She turned to Grant. "She really your housekeeper?" "Yes." "You paying her fair wages, 20 a month plus room and board?" Mrs. Doyle's eyebrows rose. "That's generous." "She's worth it." The older woman studied them both, then nodded slowly. "All right then. Welcome to Silver Ridge, Mrs. Winslow. I expect we'll be seeing more of you." She left. Ruth exhaled. Grant paid Barton, loaded the supplies onto his horse. They were halfway to the door when a man blocked their path. Tall, well-dressed, expensive boots. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Grant, didn't expect to see you in town." "Blackwell." Grant's tone went flat. "And this must be the woman everyone's discussing." The man Blackwell tipped his hat to Ruth. "Judge Richard Blackwell, ma'am. I handle legal matters in Silver Ridge." "Mrs. Winslow," Ruth said quietly. "Winslow." Blackwell's eyes sharpened. "Any relation to Thomas Winslow worked the copper mine in Coppertown?" Ruth's stomach dropped. "He was my husband." "Was?" "He died. Mine collapse." Blackwell's expression shifted, not quite pity, not quite satisfaction. Something in between. "I heard about that. Tragic. They said a lot of things." Grant interrupted. "Most of 'em lies. We done here." Blackwell stepped aside, but his eyes stayed on Ruth. "Just wanted to introduce myself, ma'am. If you need legal counsel while you're in Silver Ridge, my door's always open." "She won't," Grant said. They left. Outside, Ruth's hands shook so badly she almost dropped Hope. "You all right?" Grant asked. "He knows. Everyone's gonna know." "Let 'em. Don't change nothin'." "Grant, you don't understand. They're gonna say—" "I know what they're gonna say, and I don't care." He lifted her onto the horse swung up behind her. "You're too good at this," Ruth whispered. "At what?" "Not caring what people think." Grant was quiet for a moment. Then, "I ain't good at it. I just got better at pretendin', because the alternative is letting their judgment run my life. And I already lost too much to fear." They rode home in silence. Ruth realized something on that ride. Grant McCoy wasn't fearless. He was just more afraid of being a coward than being judged, and that she thought might be the bravest thing of all. Winter settled over the cabin like a held breath, waiting to be released. Ruth woke before dawn every morning, not because she had to, but because silence felt dangerous. Silence meant thinking. Thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant drowning. So she moved, cooked, cleaned, mended Grant's shirts with thread she pulled from her own tattered hem. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind quiet. Grant never asked her to do any of it. That was the strange part. He'd said housekeeper offered wages, but he never once told her what needed doing. He just worked chopping wood, checking trap lines, repairing tools in the shed. And when he came inside, he'd find dinner waiting and look almost surprised, like he'd forgotten people could do things for each other. 3 weeks in, Ruth finally spoke what had been building in her chest. "You don't have to pay me." Grant looked up from his coffee. "We had a deal." "I know, but—" "Then we keep it." "I haven't earned it. I'm just—" "Ruth." He set down his cup. "You feedin' me?" "Yes." "Keepin' this place from fallin' into chaos?" "I suppose." "Then you're earnin' it. Stop arguin'." Hope cooed from her basket by the fire, reaching fat baby hands toward the light. She'd gained weight, grown stronger, started laughing at things only babies could see. Ruth watched Grant watch the baby. Saw something flicker across his face, pain, longing, something too complicated to name. "You can hold her," Ruth said quietly, "if you want." Grant's hands stilled on his cup. "Wouldn't be appropriate." "Why not?" "Because she ain't mine to hold. She's a baby Grant, not property." He stood, abruptly grabbed his coat. "Got traps to check." The door closed hard. Not quite a slam, but close. Ruth picked up Hope, held her close. "What ghosts are we living with, little one?" Hope just gurgled, innocent and unaware that grief had made this cabin its home long before they arrived. That night, Grant came back after dark, smelling like pine smoke and exhaustion. He ate dinner in silence, washed his plate, moved toward his bedroom. "Grant?" He stopped, didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," Ruth said. "About earlier. I didn't mean to. You didn't do nothing wrong." "Then why did you leave like that?" He turned then, and Ruth saw it, the fracture lines in his carefully maintained composure. "Because watching you with that baby reminds me that Anna never got to hold ours. Not even once. The midwife said the cord was wrapped. Said the baby was already gone when Anna started pushing. And Anna, she bled and I couldn't stop it, and I—" His voice cracked. He pressed his fist against his mouth, fighting for control. Ruth stood, crossed the room, stopped just close enough that he could feel her presence, but not close enough to trap him. "It wasn't your fault. I wasn't there. You couldn't have known. I should have been there anyway." They stood in the space between comfort and pain, neither quite sure how to bridge it. Finally, Grant spoke. "Anna wanted a dozen kids. Said she'd fill this cabin with so much noise I'd forget what quiet sounded like. I told her we'd start with one, see how it went. Like it was a business negotiation. Like love was something you could plan." He looked at Ruth. "And now, I got a silent house and a memory that won't let me sleep. So yeah, watching you with Hope, it's hard. But that ain't your burden to carry. Maybe not, but I'm carrying it anyway." Something shifted in Grant's expression. Not quite a smile, but not despair either. Something softer. "You're a stubborn woman, Ruth Winslow." "Had to be. Soft women don't survive the road I walked." Grant nodded slowly. "Good. This territory eats soft people alive." He moved to his bedroom, paused at the door. "Thank you, for dinner. For everything." "You're welcome." After he left, Ruth sat by the fire, hope sleeping in her arms. She thought about grief and how it lived in people like a second skeleton, invisible but always felt. December arrived with teeth bared. The cold turned vicious, the kind that made breathing hurt and thinking slow. Grant spent longer hours cutting firewood, stockpiling enough to last through January. Ruth watched him work through the window, saw how he moved like a machine running on fumes. "You're gonna kill yourself," she said one evening when he stumbled in fingers white with frostbite. "Just cold." "It's not just cold. You've been out there for 12 hours straight." "Wood don't cut itself." Ruth grabbed his hands, pulled him to the fire. His fingers were ice, the tips already going gray. "When's the last time you took a break?" Grant tried to pull away. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. Sit down." "Ruth." "Grant McCoy, sit down before I make you." He blinked, surprised. Then slowly he sat. Ruth knelt in front of him, began rubbing warmth back into his hands. His fingers were huge in hers, scarred and calloused, trembling slightly from cold and exhaustion. "You can't save everyone by working yourself to death," she said quietly. "Ain't trying to save everyone, just trying to make sure you and Hope don't freeze." "We won't freeze. You've already cut enough wood for 2 winters." "Can't be too careful." Ruth looked up at him. "This isn't about being careful. This is about punishing yourself." Grant's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? You work till you can't feel your hands, eat barely enough to keep standing, sleep maybe 4 hours a night. That's not survival, Grant. That's penance." "Maybe I got things to pay for." "By dying slow in front of me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Grant's eyes widened slightly. "Ruth, you saved my life. You saved Hope's life. And now I'm watching you try to end yours, and I can't. I won't." She stopped, tears hot on her cheeks. She hadn't cried in months, hadn't let herself. But something about Grant's stubborn self-destruction broke through her carefully built walls. Grant pulled his hands free, cupped her face gently. His palms were warming now, rough but careful. "I ain't trying to die," he said. "I'm just trying to feel useful, trying to feel like I matter to someone." "You matter to me." The words hung between them, too big and too honest. Grant's thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "You don't know me well enough for that to be true." "Maybe not. But I know you're the first person in 2 years who looked at me and saw something worth saving. That matters." They stayed like that, her kneeling him, sitting both holding on to something neither could name. Then Hope cried from her basket, shattering the moment. Ruth stood quickly, turned away. Grant cleared his throat, stood, moved toward his room. "Get some sleep," Ruth said without looking at him. "You too." But neither of them slept that night. Ruth knew because she heard him moving around his room at 3 in the morning, restless and awake. And Grant knew she was awake because he could hear her singing quietly to Hope, the same lullaby she sang every night. They were 2 broken people trying to heal in the same house, and neither knew if they were helping or hurting each other. A week later, Grant brought home a surprise. He walked in carrying something wrapped in canvas, set it down carefully by the fire. "What is that?" Ruth asked. "Open it." She unwrapped the canvas. Inside was wood, smooth, carefully cut, already taking shape. "A cradle," she whispered. "Hope's outgrowing that basket. Figured she needs something proper." Ruth ran her fingers over the wood. The grain was beautiful, the joints already fitted. "Grant, this ain't finished yet. Needs rockers, a hood, some sandin'. Thought maybe..." He cleared his throat. "Thought maybe you'd want to help build it." Ruth looked up sharply. "Me? You said once you wanted to learn not to be afraid of tomorrow. Figured building something for tomorrow might help." Her throat closed. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The next day, they worked together in the woodshed. Grant showed her how to hold the plane, how to let the blade ride the grain, how to feel when the wood was fighting back. Gently. He set his hands over hers, guiding the motion. Let the tool do the work. Ruth felt the warmth of his chest against her back, the steadiness of his breathing. She smelled pine and wood smoke and something distinctly Grant leather and coffee and winter air. "Like this?" she asked. "Exactly like that." The plane moved smooth, peeling away a thin ribbon of wood. "You're a natural," Grant said. "Liar." "Honest truth. You got patient hands." They worked in comfortable silence, passing tools back and forth, falling into a rhythm they hadn't planned but somehow found anyway. Ruth caught herself smiling. Actually smiling. When was the last time that happened? "What?" Grant asked, noticing. "Nothing. Just this is nice. Building something instead of running from something." Grant nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is." Then hoofbeats outside, fast and purposeful. Grant's expression shuddered. He set down his tools, moved to the door. A man dismounted, older, dressed in black, wearing a white collar. "Preacher." "Grant McCoy," the man called. His voice carried judgment like a second skin. "Reverend Silas." Grant stepped outside. Ruth followed, hope on her hip. Silas's eyes found Ruth, immediately narrowed with recognition. "Mrs. Winslow, didn't expect to find you here." "She's my housekeeper," Grant said flatly. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Silas's smile was thin. "Grant, I'm here as a friend. The town is talking. About you. About this arrangement." "Let 'em talk." "It's not that simple. You're a prominent man. Wealthy. Unmarried. And she's a widow with a questionable past." "Careful." Grant's voice dropped to something dangerous. Silas held up his hands. "I'm not making accusations. I'm simply saying appearances matter. If you want to help this woman do it properly, marry her, or send her away. But this middle ground, it's damaging both your reputations." Ruth felt ice spread through her chest. She'd known this was coming. Had known it since the moment she accepted Grant's help. "I appreciate your concern, Reverend," Grant said. "But my private affairs are exactly that. Private. Not when they affect the moral fabric of our community." "Then maybe your community needs to examine its own moral fabric before judging mine." Silas's expression hardened. "I'm trying to protect you, Grant, both of you. But if you insist on this path, don't be surprised when people draw their own conclusions." He mounted his horse, looked down at Ruth. "Mrs. Winslow, I hope you know what you're doing. Men like Grant, good men with wounded hearts, they make promises they can't keep. Don't mistake charity for love." He rode away, leaving his poison behind. Ruth turned to go inside. Grant caught her arm. "Don't listen to him." "He's right though, isn't he? I'm ruining your reputation just by being here." "My reputation can survive." "Can it? Or are you just too stubborn to admit when you've made a mistake?" Grant's hand dropped. "That what you think this is? A mistake?" Ruth looked at him. Really looked. Saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried, the way he held himself, like he was always bracing for the next loss. "I think you're trying to save me because you couldn't save her. And that's not fair to either of us." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm saving you because you deserve saving. Did you consider that? No one's ever thought that before." "Then everyone before me was a fool." They stood in the cold, words floating between them like smoke. Finally Ruth spoke. "What happens when winter ends, Grant? When spring comes and people see I'm still here?" "I don't know, but I know I ain't gonna let them drive you away." "You might not have a choice." Grant's jaw set. "There's always a choice, and I'm choosing you." The words landed heavy and impossible. Ruth didn't know what to do with them, so she did what she always did, walked away before they could mean too much. But that night, lying in Anna's old sewing room, she couldn't stop hearing them. "I'm choosing you." No one had ever chosen her. Not her parents who died too young. Not her husband who'd been too distracted to live. Not the town that drove her out with stones and scripture. But Grant, broken, stubborn, impossible. Grant was choosing her. And God help them both, she was starting to choose him back. Christmas arrived without ceremony. Ruth woke to find Grant already outside working. She made breakfast fed. Hope tried to pretend it was just another day. But it wasn't. It was the first Christmas since Thomas died. The first Christmas Hope would remember, even if only in the quiet of her bones. Grant came in at noon, stamped snow from his boots. "Got something for you?" Ruth turned from the stove. "Grant, you don't have to." He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Open it." Inside was fabric. Deep blue, soft, warm. Enough for a dress. "Grant, this is too much." "It ain't. You need proper clothes. That dress you're wearing is more patch than original." Ruth's throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say nothing. Just make yourself something warm." He turned to leave, but Ruth grabbed his arm. "Wait. I have something for you too." She pulled out a small bundle, handed it to him. Grant unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a shirt she'd sewn from pieces of fabric she'd found in Anna's sewing basket, carefully mended and pieced together. "Saw your work shirts were wearing through," Ruth said quietly. "Thought you could use a new one." Grant held the shirt like it was made of glass. His hands trembled slightly. "Ruth, His voice broke. He cleared his throat. "Thank you. It's not much. It's everything." He looked at her then, and Ruth saw it, the naked gratitude, the desperate loneliness, the hope he was too afraid to name. "Merry Christmas, Grant." "Merry Christmas, Ruth." They ate dinner by firelight, venison potatoes, the last of the canned peaches. Hope sat in her basket, gnawing on a wooden spoon, oblivious to the weight of the moment. Grant raised his coffee cup. "To survivin' another year." Ruth raised hers. "To more than surviving." Their cups touched with a soft clink. Outside, snow fell silent and endless. Inside, something fragile and dangerous was growing, something neither of them had the courage to name yet. But it was there. In the way Grant's eyes lingered when Ruth laughed, in the way Ruth's hands steadied when Grant was near, in the space between loneliness and belonging, grief and hope, yesterday and tomorrow. It was there, and it was terrifying. January brought the first real test. Hope developed a fever, sudden, burning, merciless. One morning she was fine. By noon she was screaming, her skin hot as coals. Ruth tried everything: cool cloths, willow bark tea, prayers whispered in the dark. Nothing worked. Grant found her at dawn, pacing with Hope limp in her arms. "How long?" he asked. "Since midnight." He didn't hesitate. "I'm riding to town for the doctor." "Grant, there's a storm coming. You can see it in the sky." "Then I'll ride fast." "You could die out there." He pulled on his coat, his gloves. "And if I don't go, she might. That ain't a choice." Ruth grabbed his arm. "Grant, please, don't do this. Don't risk yourself for..." "For what?" "For your daughter. For a child that ain't mine." His eyes blazed. "Ruth, that baby is sleeping in my house, eating my food, becoming part of my life, whether I planned it or not. And I ain't gonna stand here and watch her die because I was too much of a coward to ride through a little snow. This isn't a little snow. This is... I know what it is. I'm going anyway." He cupped her face, made her look at him. "I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Ruth's vision blurred. "I can't lose you, too." "You won't. You don't know that." "No, but I'm gonna try my damnedest to come back. Because you need me. And because..." He stopped, started again. "Because I need you to be here when I get back." He kissed her forehead, quick, desperate, terrified, then pulled away and mounted his horse. Ruth watched him ride into the gathering storm, hope burning in her arms. "Please," she whispered to whatever God might be listening. "Please don't take him too." The hours crawled. Ruth walked circles around the cabin, hope in her arms, singing every lullaby she knew. The baby's breathing grew shallow, her eyes glassy and unfocused. Ruth remembered children from her childhood who'd burned like this and never cooled. Remembered her mother trying to save them, failing burying them in graves too small. "Not you," Ruth told Hope. "You don't get to die. Not after everything we survived." But the fever climbed. Hope's tiny chest heaved with effort. Her lips turned pale. Ruth pressed her face against her daughter's burning forehead and wept. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I brought you into this world and I can't keep you safe and I—" The door burst open. Grant stumbled through ice coating his beard, his face gray with exhaustion. He held out a small bottle. "Doctor said 2 drops every 4 hours." Ruth grabbed the bottle with shaking hands, administered the medicine. Hope's eyes fluttered. She coughed, but she swallowed. Then Ruth turned to Grant. His fingertips were white. His cheeks splotched with frostbite. He swayed where he stood. "Your hands," Ruth said, "don't matter. Sit down." "I'm fine." "Grant, sit down before you fall down." He obeyed, too exhausted to argue. Ruth pulled off his gloves, saw the damage, fingers swollen, tips pale and bloodless. "You rode 20 miles in that storm," she whispered. "Had to. You could have died. Didn't, though." Ruth pressed his frozen hands between hers, breathed warm air over his skin. Tears streamed down her face. Fear, gratitude, something bigger than both. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk this?" Grant looked at her with eyes too honest for safety. "Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my housekeeper. You stopped being just some woman I helped at a crossroads. You became—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "You became mine. You and Hope. Mine to protect. Mine to save. Mine to—" His voice broke. "And I can't lose what's mine. Not again. I can't survive it." Ruth's breath caught. "Grant, I know I got no right to say that. I know you didn't ask for it. But it's the truth. And if being honest means you leave, then at least you'll leave knowing someone chose you. Someone thought you were worth rising for." His hands were warming now, painful as blood returned. But he didn't pull away. Ruth leaned forward, pressed her forehead against his. "You're the first thing that's felt like home in 2 years. You're the first thing that's felt like living." They stayed like that, broken people holding each other together, hoping it would be enough. Hope's fever broke by morning. Grant's hands were bandaged, painful but healing. He couldn't work for a week. Ruth cared for him, feeding him soup, reading to him from Anna's Bible, sitting beside his chair while he slept. One evening he dozed off mid-sentence. Ruth covered him with Anna's shawl. It smelled different now. Not like Anna anymore. Like herbs and bread and hope. Like Ruth. Grant didn't wake, but his breathing steadied. His face, usually tight with control, relaxed into something almost peaceful. Ruth touched his cheek gently. "I'm choosing you too," she whispered. "God help us both." Outside, the storm had passed. Stars emerged, cold and distant and beautiful. Inside, 2 people who'd thought they were done loving found themselves beginning again, tentative, terrified, inevitable. The cradle sat unfinished in the woodshed waiting. But something else was being built now. Something slower and stronger. Something that might actually last. February arrived with false hope. Warm days that felt like spring, cold nights that remembered winter. Grant's hands healed enough to work again. He and Ruth finished the cradle together, working in the woodshed while Hope napped. The last piece was the headboard. Grant showed Ruth how to carve simple flowers into the wood. "Anna loved wildflowers," he said quietly. "Used to pick 'em every spring, fill the cabin with color." Ruth's hands stilled. "You miss her? Every day? Does it hurt less with time?" Grant considered the question. "No. You just get better at carrying it. Like learning to walk with a limp. Still hurts, but you figure out how to keep moving." "I'm not trying to replace her." "I know. And I ain't trying to replace Thomas." "Then what are we doing?" Grant set down his tools, looked at her directly. "Honestly, I think we're trying to survive each other. Trying to figure out if two broken people can make something whole. Can they? Don't know, but I'm willing to find out if you are. Ruth touched the carved flowers, rough but careful, made with hands that knew how to build and break and build again. I'm willing, she whispered. Grant's hand covered hers on the wood. Then that's enough. They finished the cradle that afternoon. Carried it inside together, set it by the fire. Hope fit perfectly, her fat baby hands reaching for the carved flowers. Ruth stood back, looked at what they'd made together. It's beautiful. It's ours, Grant said. And the way he said it, ours, not mine, or yours but ours, made Ruth's chest ache with something dangerously close to hope. That night they sat by the fire after Hope fell asleep. Grant opened Anna's Bible, tried to read, stumbled over words. I ain't good at this, he admitted. Let me help. Ruth moved closer, pointed to the words. Together they worked through the passage, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Grant's voice grew steadier with each line. When he finished, he looked at Ruth. That's you and me now, ain't it? Where you go. I go, Ruth finished. Where you stay. I stay. The words hung between them, a promise neither had planned, but both recognized. Grant reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind Ruth's ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. I'm gonna kiss you, he said. And if you don't want that, you better stop me now. Ruth's heart hammered. Grant. Because once I do, I ain't gonna be able to pretend this is just charity, or convenience, or me trying to make up for failing Anna. It's gonna be real, and I need to know if you can handle that. Ruth's breath caught. Could she handle it? Could she risk loving again after losing so much? But then she thought about Grant riding through a blizzard to save Hope, thought about his careful hands teaching her to build, thought about the way he looked at her like she was worth choosing. Kiss me, she whispered. Grant pulled her close, kissed her with the desperation of a man who'd forgotten what hope tasted like. Ruth kissed him back with the fierce hunger of someone who'd been starving for kindness. When they finally pulled apart, Grant rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything, he said. I know. The town's gonna lose their minds. I know. And I don't give a damn. Ruth laughed, actually laughed for the first time in forever. Neither do I. They held each other by the fire, two broken people beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could be whole together. Outside, winter was dying. Spring was coming. And with it, trouble they couldn't yet see. But for tonight, they had each other. They had Hope sleeping in her new cradle. They had a cabin that finally felt like home instead of a tomb. It was enough. It had to be. They had 5 days of peace before the world came for them. 5 days of Grant teaching Ruth to read better by firelight. 5 days of Ruth catching Grant smiling at nothing, at everything at her. 5 days of Hope laughing when Grant made shadow puppets on the wall, her fat baby hands reaching for shapes that couldn't be caught. 5 days of pretending they could build a life in hiding. Then, Judge Blackwell arrived with 4 riders at dawn. Ruth heard them first hoofbeats coming fast, purposeful. She was kneading bread flour, dusting her hands, when the sound made her freeze. Grant. He was already moving to the window, his body going tense in that way that meant danger. Stay inside, he said. Grant who? Stay inside with Hope. Lock the door after me. He grabbed his coat and stepped onto the porch before Ruth could argue. She scooped Hope from her cradle, pressed against the wall by the window, where she could see but not be easily seen. Judge Blackwell dismounted first. Behind him came Sheriff Tom Briggs, Reverend Silas, and 2 men Ruth recognized from town: Henry Barton, who ran the general store, and James Webb, who owned the bank. All men of standing. All men with opinions about how other people should live. Grant? Blackwell called out, his voice carrying false warmth. Hope we're not interrupting. What do you want, Richard? Just a conversation, man to man, about the situation here. Grant's stance widened slightly. his shoulders squaring. "Ain't no situation, just my life, my business." Sheriff Briggs stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt. Not threatening exactly, but not friendly either. "Grant, we're here as concerned citizens. You understand how this looks. How what looks? You, her, that baby, living here, unmarried." Reverend Silas's voice carried the weight of judgment dressed up as worry. "The whole territory is talking. It reflects poorly on Silver Ridge having this sort of arrangement so publicly displayed." Grant's jaw tightened. "What I do on my land is my affair." "Not when it affects community standards," Barton interjected. "We got families here, Grant, children. They see this, and they ask questions their parents shouldn't have to answer." Webb nodded. "There's also the financial consideration. Your timber contracts, your business relationships, investors talk. They hear about scandal, they get nervous." Ruth's chest tightened. They were circling these men, testing Grant's defenses, looking for the crack where they could wedge their judgment in. Blackwell's expression softened into something that might have been sympathy on a more honest face. "Grant, we know your heart. We know you're trying to help this woman, and that's admirable. But there's a right way and a wrong way to show Christian charity." "And what's the right way, Richard?" "Marry her, make it proper, or send her away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. But this middle ground, it's destroying both your reputations." Grant was quiet for too long. Ruth watched his shoulders, saw them curve inward just slightly. Saw him looking at these men, pillars of the community, men whose opinions had weight, and she saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. The cost of defying them, the price of standing alone. "I'll need time to consider," Grant finally said. Ruth's stomach dropped. "Of course," Blackwell said smoothly. "We're not unreasonable men. Take a few days. Think about what's best for everyone involved. But Grant..." His tone hardened. "We can't let this continue indefinitely. One way or another, this situation needs resolution." The men mounted their horses. Blackwell paused, looked toward the cabin window where Ruth stood hidden. "Mrs. Winslow," he called out, knowing she was listening, "I hope you understand we mean you no harm. We simply want what's best for everyone." Then they rode away, leaving their poison behind like a stain. Grant stood on the porch long after they'd gone. When he finally came inside, he wouldn't meet Ruth's eyes. "Grant. Not now. We need to talk about..." "I said not now, Ruth." He grabbed his axe and went outside. Ruth heard him splitting wood with vicious, desperate strikes, the sound of a man trying to chop his way through an impossible problem. Hope whimpered. Ruth held her close, rocking automatically, her mind spinning. She'd seen this before. This exact pattern. Good intentions crushed under the weight of community pressure. Kind men turning cruel because cruelty was easier than courage. Thomas had been like that. Good, decent, weak. When the other miners started blaming Ruth for the accidents, Thomas had believed them, had started looking at her with suspicion instead of love, had died before he could decide whether to defend her or abandon her. Grant was stronger than Thomas. But was he strong enough? Night fell, and Grant still hadn't come back inside. Ruth fed Hope, rocked her to sleep, sat by the fire alone. Finally, near midnight, the door opened. Grant stepped in, smelling like wood smoke and exhaustion and defeat. "Say it," Ruth said quietly. "Say what?" "That you're going to send me away. That they convinced you. That I'm not worth the fight." Grant flinched like she'd struck him. "That ain't..." "Isn't it? You've been out there for 12 hours trying to decide. So decide. Tell me to pack. Tell me you made a mistake bringing me here. Tell me..." "I can't lose everything, Ruth." His voice cracked. "I can't lose my business, my reputation, everything I built. Anna and I, we worked for that life. And if I defy the whole town, if I make enemies of every man with influence, what happens? I lose the contracts. The mill shuts down. The ranch fails. And then I got nothing to offer you anyway." Ruth stood slowly. "So it's about money. It's about survival." "No, Grant. Survival is what I did. Walking roads in winter, feeding my baby with nothing, sleeping in ditches. That's survival. What you're talking about is comfort, and you're willing to trade me for it. That ain't fair. Nothing about this is fair. Ruth moved to the bedroom, started gathering her few possessions. I should have known better. Should have known that when it came down to choosing between me and the world's approval, every man chooses approval. Grant grabbed her arm, spun her around. What do you want from me? You want me to destroy my life, burn every bridge, become an outcast for a woman I've known 3 months. The words hit like fists. Ruth yanked her arm free. I want you to be the man who rode through a blizzard to save my daughter. The man who said he was choosing me. But that man was a lie, wasn't he? That man disappears the second his comfort gets threatened. You don't understand the pressure. I understand perfectly. I understand that your fear of losing money is bigger than your promise to me. I understand that when men with titles and power show up, I become disposable. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. So here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning I'm leaving. You don't have to send me away. I'm choosing to go. Because I would rather walk back into the wilderness than stay where I'm not worth fighting for. Ruth, please. No. You had your chance to fight for me. You chose not to. We're done. She went to the bedroom, closed the door firmly. On the other side, she heard Grant's ragged breathing, heard him punch the wall. Once heard him stumble outside again. Ruth sank onto the bed, pressed her fist against her mouth to muffle the sobs. Hope slept peacefully in her cradle, innocent of the fact that they were about to be homeless again. I'm sorry, baby girl, Ruth whispered. I thought we'd found home. But home isn't real. Home is just another word for temporary. She packed through the night. By dawn, her bundle was ready. Grant was waiting in the main room when she emerged. He looked like he hadn't slept. Eyes, red jaw, stubbled hands, shaking slightly. Ruth. Don't. She kept her voice steady. Just don't. Where will you go? Does it matter? Of course it matters. I can give you money. Enough to get somewhere safe. Enough to... I don't want your money, Grant. I don't want your guilt. I just want to leave. Hope started crying. Ruth held her close, whispered reassurances she didn't believe. Grant stood in her path. You can't leave in winter. It's still too cold. You'll die out there. Then I'll die. Better than living where I'm not wanted. I want you here. But not enough to fight for me. Not enough to risk anything that matters to you. Grant's face crumpled. Ruth, please. Give me time to figure this out. There has to be a way to... There isn't. Men like Judge Blackwell, they don't compromise. They demand obedience. And men like you... Her voice broke. Men like you always cave. She pushed past him, opened the door. The cold hit her like a slap. She'd forgotten how brutal Montana winter could be when you didn't have walls around you. She started walking anyway. Behind her, Grant called out, Ruth, don't do this, don't... His voice cracked. Don't leave me alone again. Ruth stopped. Didn't turn around. You chose alone, Grant. You just chose it without me. She kept walking. She made it half a mile before her legs gave out. Not from cold this time, from heartbreak. From the crushing weight of being discarded again. From the realization that she'd let herself hope, and hoping had destroyed her. Ruth sank against a tree. Hope crying against her chest. She was so tired. Tired of walking. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the woman everyone found easy to abandon. I'm sorry, she told Hope for the 100th time. I'm so sorry you got stuck with a cursed mother. Hope just cried, hungry and cold, and too young to understand that the world was cruel to women like them. Ruth closed her eyes. Maybe she'd just rest here, just for a minute. Just until the cold didn't hurt anymore. Then hoofbeats. Again. Always hoofbeats at the worst moments. Ruth didn't look up, didn't care. Let whoever it was judge her, pity her, leave her. She was done performing for an audience that never applauded. "Mrs. Winslow?" Not Grant's voice, rougher, older. Ruth forced her eyes open. Sheriff Briggs sat on his horse looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. "Don't much care what I should or shouldn't do anymore, Sheriff." He dismounted, moved closer. "McCoy send you away." "I left." "Same thing, maybe." Ruth laughed bitterly. "Maybe." Briggs crouched down to her level, his knees cracking. "Can I tell you something, ma'am? Not as sheriff. Just as a man who's lived too long and seen too much." Ruth shrugged. What did it matter? Grant McCoy loved his wife fierce. When she died, it broke something in him. Made him afraid. Not of death, Grant ain't afraid of dying. Made him afraid of failing someone again. Of not being enough when it mattered. Then he should have stayed broken. Shouldn't have made promises he couldn't keep. Maybe. Briggs pulled out a canteen, offered it. Ruth drank because dehydration killed just as sure as cold. Or maybe he's just a man trying to figure out if love is worth the risk of losing everything. And maybe he's making the wrong choice right now because he's terrified. Fear doesn't excuse cruelty. No, ma'am, it don't. But sometimes good men do wrong things because they're scared. Don't make it right. Just makes it human. Ruth looked at him. Why are you telling me this? Because I was there when Anna died. Watched Grant try to save her fail, then spend 2 years punishing himself for it. And last week, I saw him ride through a blizzard that should have killed him to save your little girl. That ain't a man who don't care, Mrs. Winslow. That's a man who cares too much and don't know how to handle it. Briggs stood, offered his hand. Come on. I'll take you back to town. Get you somewhere warm while you figure out your next move. Ruth stared at his hand. Charity again. Pity dressed up as kindness. And if I refuse, then I arrest you for child endangerment and take you anyway. Your choice. At least it was honest. Ruth took his hand, let him pull her up. He lifted her onto his horse. Her and Hope both then swung up behind her. For what it's worth, Briggs said quietly as they rode. I told the judge and the reverend they were wrong. Told them Grant's personal life ain't their business. But men like that, they don't listen to reason. They listen to power, and they got more of it than I do. Why didn't you say that when they came to the cabin? Because I'm a coward too, ma'am. Just like most men when it comes down to choosing between doing right and keeping status quo. At least he admitted it. That was something. They rode into Silver Ridge just as the town was waking. Briggs took her to a small boarding house run by an elderly woman named Sarah Mitchell. Mrs. Mitchell here is one of the few decent souls in this town, Briggs said. She'll give you room and board till you figure out what's next. I'll cover the cost. Ruth's pride wanted to refuse. Her daughter's needs wouldn't let her. Thank you, Sheriff. He tipped his hat. Don't thank me yet. This town's got a way of eating up women who don't fit their idea of proper. You watch yourself, Mrs. Winslow. Mrs. Mitchell was kind in that practical, no-nonsense way frontier women had. She showed Ruth to a small room, brought warm water for washing, didn't ask questions that would hurt to answer. You need anything, you call out, Mrs. Mitchell said. And don't mind the gossips. They'll talk no matter what you do. Ruth fed, Hope changed her, rocked her to sleep. Then she sat by the window and watched Silver Ridge wake up to another day of judgment and small cruelties. She saw women whispering on street corners, saw men pointing toward the boarding house, saw Reverend Silas walking with Judge Blackwell, their heads close together, plotting righteousness, and she saw Grant's empty horse tied outside the saloon, which meant he was inside drowning his choices in whiskey. Good. Let him drown. Ruth turned away from the window and tried to figure out how to survive in a town that wanted her gone. 3 days passed like a slow death. Ruth barely left her room. Mrs. Mitchell brought food, took away dishes, asked no questions. Hope was the only thing keeping Ruth from completely unraveling. The baby needed her, so she got up, functioned, pretended to be whole. On the fourth day, someone knocked. Ruth opened the door, expecting Mrs. Mitchell. Found Martha Doyle instead. The older woman pushed past Ruth without invitation, set down a basket on the small table. Brought you some things. Bread, cheese, dried apples, and fabric for making the baby some proper clothes. Ruth stared. Why would you? Because I remember what it's like to be judged by men who never walked a mile in desperation. Martha's expression was sharp. Also because Grant McCoy looks like death warmed over, and someone needs to fix this mess before two stubborn people destroy each other. There's nothing to fix. He made his choice. Did he? Or did he panic and make the wrong choice and now he's too proud to admit it? Same thing. No, girl, it ain't. Martha sat heavily in the room's only chair. Let me tell you about my husband. Good man, decent. But when I lost our first baby, he couldn't handle my grief. Left me. Said it hurt too much to watch me suffer. Said he was doing me a favor. She smoothed her skirt. I hated him for years. Then one day he came back. Told me he'd been wrong. Told me that leaving was the most cowardly thing he'd ever done and that he'd spent every day since regretting it. Did you take him back? No. Because by then I'd learned to survive without him. Learned that my value didn't depend on whether a man was brave enough to love me, but I did forgive him. Not for his sake, for mine. Because carrying hate is heavier than carrying love. Martha leaned forward. Grant McCoy is making a mistake, but he's making it out of fear, not malice. And if you walk away now, you'll always wonder if he could have changed. If you could have been the thing worth fighting for. I shouldn't have to prove I'm worth fighting for. You're right, you shouldn't. But that ain't how the world works. Sometimes good people need time to find their courage. Question is, you gonna give him that time, or you gonna let pride make you run? Ruth's throat tightened. What if I stay, and he still chooses wrong? Then you leave knowing you gave him every chance, and you move on without regret. Martha stood. But running now, that's just fear matching fear, and nothing good grows from that. She moved to the door, paused. Town meeting tonight at the church. They're discussing the moral situation, meaning you. Whole town will be there, including Grant. I'm not going to sit there and be judged by people who don't know me. Then don't sit, stand, speak. Make them see you as the person instead of a scandal. Martha's eyes glinted. Or hide up here and let them write your story without you. Your choice. She left. The basket remained full of kindness and challenge in equal measure. Ruth looked at Hope asleep in her basket. What do I do, baby girl? Do I fight or do I run? Hope slept on peaceful and unhelpful. Ruth spent the rest of the day pacing, arguing with herself, trying to decide if Martha was wise or just meddling. By sunset, she'd made her choice. The church was packed. Ruth stood outside holding Hope, her heart hammering. Through the windows, she could see the whole town, shopkeepers, farmers, families, all gathered to discuss her fate like she was property instead of person. She pushed open the door. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Judge Blackwell stood at the front mid-speech. Mrs. Winslow, he said with false courtesy, we weren't expecting you. Clearly. Ruth walked down the aisle, her footsteps echoing. But since you're all so concerned about my moral character, I figured I should be present for my trial. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ruth saw Grant in the back corner, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Their eyes met. His face crumpled with something between relief and despair. Ruth forced herself to look away. She had something to say. She turned to face the congregation. You all know who I am. You know what they said about me in Coppertown, that I'm cursed, that men die around me, that I'm dangerous. She let that hang in the air. And you know what? Maybe they're right. Maybe I am cursed. My husband died. My town cast me out. I walked roads in winter with a baby who was dying in my arms. That's a life people would call cursed. She shifted Hope to her other hip. But I'm still here, And so is my daughter. We survived because one man, one stubborn, broken good man, decided we were worth saving. Decided that kindness mattered more than reputation. That mercy mattered more than gossip. Her voice strengthened. Grant McCoy gave me shelter when I had none. Gave my daughter medicine when she was dying. Treated me with respect when no one else would. And now you're here to tell him he's done something wrong. You're here to punish him for being kind. Judge. Blackwell stood. Mrs. Winslow, no one is punishing. Then what is this? What do you call a town meeting to discuss whether a man should be allowed to help someone in need? You call it concern. I call it cruelty dressed in Sunday clothes. Ruth turned to address everyone. I know what you think. That I seduced him. That I'm taking advantage. That I'm trying to trap a wealthy man. She laughed bitterly. I don't want Grant's money. I don't want his house. I don't want anything except the right to exist without being judged for crimes I didn't commit. Reverend Silas stood now. Mrs. Winslow, we understand your circumstances are difficult, but surely you can see how this arrangement appears. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man appears, how wrong, shameful. Ruth's anger burned hot now. Let me tell you what's shameful. Driving a widow with a baby into winter and calling it righteousness. Forcing a good man to choose between kindness and community standing. Using God's name to justify cruelty, that's shameful. The church was silent. Ruth turned to Grant. He was staring at her like she was something holy and impossible. I release you, she said quietly but clearly. From any obligation, any promise, any guilt. You don't have to fight for me. You don't have to sacrifice anything. I'll leave Silver Ridge tomorrow, and you can go back to your life. Grant's face went white. But I want you to know something. Ruth continued, her voice breaking slightly. You saved my life. And for a little while you made me believe I was worth saving. That matters. Even if this ends badly, even if I have to walk away, it mattered. She turned back to the congregation. So judge me if you want. Call me cursed. Call me shameful. I don't care anymore. Because I know who I am. I'm a woman who survived. Who kept her daughter alive against impossible odds. Who learned that sometimes the people who claim to speak for God are the ones who understand His mercy least. She walked toward the door. Every step felt like walking through water. Ruth? Grant's voice stopped her. She turned. He was standing now, moving to the front of the church. His hands trembled, but his voice was steady. I got something to say. Judge Blackwell tried to interrupt. Grant, perhaps this isn't... Sit down, Richard. The command in Grant's voice made everyone freeze. He moved to stand beside Ruth, close enough that she could feel his warmth. This town has been good to me, Grant said. Supported my business, respected my name, and I appreciate that, she ate. I truly do. He looked at Judge Blackwell. But if supporting me means I gotta sacrifice the first person who made me feel alive in 2 years, if respect means I gotta abandon a woman and child to protect my reputation, then I don't want it. Gasps rippled through the church. Grant turned to face everyone. Ruth Winslow came to me broken and desperate. And yeah, I took her in. I gave her shelter, paid her wages, helped her daughter survive. And you know what happened? I started healing. Started remembering what it felt like to have purpose. Started understanding what Anna tried to teach me about love, being a choice, not a transaction. His voice grew stronger. So here's my choice. I choose Ruth. I choose hope. I choose kindness over reputation, mercy over judgment, love over fear. And if that makes me a scandal in your eyes, then so be it. I'd rather be a scandal with her than respectable without her. Ruth's breath caught. Grant turned to her, took her hand. I was wrong. I let fear silence me when I should have been shouting. I let their judgment matter more than your worth. And I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry. He dropped to one knee right there in front of God and everyone. Ruth Winslow, I ain't got a ring ready. I ain't got pretty words planned. But I got a house that needs you in it. I got a heart that beats different when you're near. I got a life that only makes sense with you in it." His eyes were wet now. "Marry me. Not because they demand it, not because it's proper, but because I love you. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because I want to spend every day proving I'm brave enough to deserve you." Ruth couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only feel her heart breaking and mending simultaneously. "Grant, you said you release me from obligation. Well, I don't accept. I'm obligated to you by choice, by love, by the fact that you walked into my life and reminded me what living feels like." He squeezed her hand. "So marry me, please. Let me fight for you every day for the rest of our lives." The church was dead silent. Ruth looked at this man, broken, stubborn, impossible, brave when it mattered most, and felt something shift inside her chest. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder. "Yes." Grant stood, pulled her into his arms, kissed her like she was air, and he'd been drowning. The church erupted. Some cheering, some gasping. Judge Blackwell looking like he'd swallowed nails. But Grant didn't care. He held Ruth and Hope, both his family, now his choice, now his home now. Martha Doyle started clapping. Then Sheriff Briggs joined. Then Mrs. Mitchell. Slowly more people joined until half the church was applauding and the other half was fleeing in scandalized horror. Reverend Silas looked between Grant and Ruth and the divided congregation and finally smiled. "Well then," he said, "looks like I'll be performing a wedding soon." Grant laughed, actually laughed for the first time in years. "Tomorrow if you're willing." "Tomorrow it is." They walked out of that church together, Grant, Ruth, and Hope. A family forged in fire and judgment and mercy. Behind them, Silver Ridge would gossip for months. Some would forgive. Some wouldn't. Some would see redemption. Some would see scandal. But for the first time in 2 years, Ruth didn't care what anyone saw. She only cared what she felt. And she felt chosen. Finally, completely, impossibly chosen. The morning of the wedding arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted. Ruth woke in Mrs. Mitchell's boarding house. Hope curled against her chest, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of dread pressing down. She felt something lighter, something dangerous. She felt hope. Mrs. Mitchell knocked softly entered with a dress draped over her arm. "Belonged to my daughter. She'd want you to have it." The dress was simple, cream-colored, high-necked, practical, but clean and whole. Ruth touched the fabric, her throat tight. "I can't accept." "You can and you will. Can't marry Grant McCoy and Rags Girl. The gossips would never let you forget it." Ruth took the dress, held it like a fragile thing. "What if this is a mistake?" Mrs. Mitchell sat on the bed, her weathered hands folding in her lap. "Might be. Marriage usually is at first. Two broken people trying to fit their pieces together, there's always mistakes. Question is, are you both willing to fix them? I don't know. Then you'll find out. That's what marriage is. Finding out if love is stronger than fear, every single day." She stood, moved to the door. "Martha's downstairs. She'll help with your hair. And Ruth, that man stood up in front of the whole town and chose you. That ain't nothing. Don't let fear convince you it is." After she left, Ruth dressed slowly. The fabric felt strange against her skin, too nice, too clean, like she was wearing someone else's life. Hope babbled happily, reaching for Ruth's hair. "What do you think, baby girl? Am I making the right choice?" Hope grinned, all gums and innocence. "You're no help at all." Downstairs, Martha was waiting with pins and determination. She twisted Ruth's hair into something respectable, tucked wildflowers behind her ear. "There, you look like a bride instead of a refugee." Ruth studied herself in the small mirror. She looked different, softer, like a woman who might actually deserve good things. "What if he changes his mind?" Ruth whispered. Martha's hand stilled. Then you survive, like you've been surviving. But Ruth, stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sometimes good things happen and they stay good. The church was half empty. That hurt more than Ruth expected. She'd known not everyone would come, but seeing the empty pews, seeing who chose to stay away, made her chest ache. But the people who came mattered. Mrs. Mitchell sat in front, dabbing her eyes. Sheriff Briggs stood near the back, his hat in his hands. Martha took a seat beside a young couple Ruth didn't recognize. And scattered throughout were faces Ruth had seen in town, not many but enough. Enough to say, "We see you. We choose mercy over judgment." Grant stood at the altar next to Reverend Silas, and when Ruth walked down that aisle, he looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd forgotten how to say. He was wearing a new shirt, the one she'd made him for Christmas. That detail broke something in Ruth's chest. He'd kept it. Saved it for today. She reached the altar. Grant took her hand, squeezed it. "You came," he whispered. "Did you think I wouldn't? Was afraid you'd realize you could do better. There is no better. There's just you." Reverend Silas cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The church doors burst open. Judge Blackwell strode in, 3 men behind him. Not just any men, territorial marshals, their badges gleaming. Grant's hand tightened on Ruth's. "Richard, what the hell?" "I'm sorry, Grant. I truly am." Blackwell's expression was pained but determined. "But I can't let this wedding proceed." The church erupted. Martha stood shouting something. Sheriff Briggs moved toward the marshals, his hand on his gun. "On what grounds?" Grant demanded. Blackwell pulled out a paper. "I've been conducting inquiries about Mrs. Winslow's past, about the circumstances of her husband's death." Ruth's blood turned to ice. "And what I found—" Blackwell looked at Ruth with something like pity. "Mrs. Winslow, you are wanted in Coppertown for questioning regarding the death of Thomas Winslow. There are sworn statements claiming you caused the mine collapse through deliberate sabotage." The words hit like bullets. Ruth couldn't breathe. "That's a lie," she gasped. "I never—" "There are witnesses. Mining foremen. 3 workers. They all testified that you visited the mine the day before the collapse, that you were seen near the support beams." Grant stepped between Ruth and the marshals. "She was bringing her husband lunch. That ain't a crime." "No, but tampering with mine supports is. And there's evidence suggesting the collapse wasn't accidental." One of the marshals moved forward. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us. You'll be transported back to Coppertown to stand trial." "No." Grant's voice was flat, dangerous. "You ain't taking her anywhere." "Sir, we don't want trouble." "Then leave, because I ain't letting you take my wife." "She's not your wife yet," Blackwell said quietly. "And Grant, if you interfere with federal marshals, you'll be arrested too. Is that what you want? To throw away everything for a woman who might be a murderer?" The word hung in the air like poison. Murderer. Ruth looked at the faces in the church, saw doubt creeping in, saw people reconsidering their mercy. "I didn't kill him," Ruth said, her voice shaking. "Thomas died because a beam collapsed. I had nothing to do with it." "Then you'll have your chance to prove that in court," the marshal said. "But ma'am, you need to come with us. Now." Grant didn't move. "Ruth, look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "Did you kill your husband?" The question landed like a physical blow. After everything, after the church speech, after the proposal, after choosing each other, he was asking if she was a murderer. "No," she whispered. "I swear on Hope's life I didn't." Grant searched her face for a long moment. Then he turned to the marshals. "She's not going anywhere." Sheriff Briggs stepped forward. "Grant, don't do this. They got legal authority." "I don't care. They want Ruth. They go through me." The lead marshal sighed. "Sir, we will arrest you. We will take her anyway. And you'll lose everything, your freedom, your reputation, your future." Is that really worth it for a woman you barely know? I know enough. I know she's innocent. I know she's being railroaded by a town that needs someone to blame. And I know I ain't letting her face that alone. Blackwell stepped closer. Grant, please. Think about what you're doing. If you're arrested, who runs your business, who protects your assets, you could lose everything you and Anna built. The mention of Anna made Grant flinch, but he didn't back down. Anna would have stood for her, would have fought for her. I'm just doing what my wife would have done. He looked at Ruth. Where you go, I go. Remember, that's the promise, and I ain't breaking it. Ruth's vision blurred. Grant, you can't. Watch me. The marshals moved forward. Grant's hand went to his gun. Stop! Ruth's voice cut through the tension. Just stop. Everyone! She stepped away from Grant, held up her hands. I'll go with you. Peacefully. No trouble. Ruth, no. Yes. She turned to Grant, cupped his face with her shaking hands. You can't throw your life away for me. I won't let you. I'm not throwing it away. I'm choosing you. Then choose smart. Don't get yourself killed or arrested. Don't destroy everything you built. Her voice cracked. Just trust that I'll survive this, like I've survived everything else. Grant's eyes were wild with panic and rage and helplessness. I can't lose you. Not now. Not after. You won't lose me. I'll fight this. I'll prove I'm innocent. And when I do, I'll come back to you. But Grant... She pressed her forehead against his. I need you to be here when I get back. I need you to stay free, stay alive, stay you. Can you do that for me? He was shaking now, his hands gripping her arms like he could hold her here through sheer will. This ain't right. This ain't... I know. But sometimes doing the right thing means doing the hard thing. You taught me that. She kissed him, desperate, terrified, loving, then pulled away and turned to the marshals. I'm ready. They put chains on her wrists. Ruth tried not to think about what that meant. Tried not to look at the people in the church who were nodding like they'd known all along she was guilty. She focused on Hope still in Mrs. Mitchell's arms, oblivious to the fact that her mother was being taken away. Take care of her, Ruth said to Mrs. Mitchell. Please. She needs... I'll keep her safe. Mrs. Mitchell promised, tears streaming. You just come back. Grant followed them to the door. I'm coming with you, to Coppertown. I'll hire lawyers, I'll testify, I'll... No. Ruth stopped, looked back at him. You stay here. Protect Hope. Make sure she's safe. That's how you help me. By keeping our daughter safe. Our daughter. The words made Grant's face crumple. Ruth? Promise me, Grant. Promise you'll take care of her. He nodded, unable to speak. The marshals led Ruth out of the church. She heard Grant's anguished shout behind her, heard him punch something, heard Martha trying to calm him. Ruth kept walking, kept her spine straight, kept breathing even though every breath felt like drowning. They loaded her into a wagon. As they pulled away from Silver Ridge, Ruth watched Grant standing in front of the church. Hope in his arms, now both of them getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared. Gone. Everything she'd fought for, built, hoped for, gone. The wagon rolled toward Coppertown and whatever waited there. Ruth closed her eyes and tried to remember how to survive. The journey to Coppertown took 3 days. 3 days of chains. 3 days of silence from the marshals. 3 days of Ruth's mind spinning through every possible outcome, each worse than the last. They arrived at sunset. Coppertown looked exactly as Ruth remembered, harsh, unforgiving, built on hope and broken on greed. The jail was small, 2 cells, both empty. The marshals locked Ruth in one, removed her chains, left without a word. Ruth sat on the thin cot and tried not to fall apart. She'd been in Coppertown less than an hour when the mining foreman came to visit. Fletcher Davis, a thick man with cruel eyes and a grudge he'd been nursing for 2 years. Well, well, the widow returns. Ruth didn't stand. Didn't give him the satisfaction. I didn't kill Thomas. Didn't say you did. Not directly. Fletcher leaned against the bars. But you distracted him, made him careless. He was thinking about you instead of watching his beams. And when that ceiling came down, 6 men died. 6 families lost their providers. Because Thomas Winslow was too busy mooning over his pretty wife to do his job right. That's not what happened. Ain't it? Then why were you at the mine that day? Why were you nosing around where women got no business being? I was bringing him lunch. That's all. Fletcher's smile was ugly. See, that's what don't add up. Because 3 different men saw you near the support beams, saw you touching something, saw you leave quick-like right before shift change. Ruth's stomach dropped. I didn't touch anything. I got turned around. I was trying to find Thomas and I got lost in the tunnels, that's all it was. Maybe. Or maybe you knew Thomas was planning to leave you. Maybe you knew he'd started talking about how cursed you were, how marrying you was the worst mistake of his life. And maybe you decided if you couldn't have him, nobody could. The accusation hit like a fist. Thomas was going to leave me. Fletcher's expression shifted to something almost pitying. You didn't know he'd been talking to the owner about transferring to a different mine. Said he couldn't stand living with the bad luck you brought. Was gonna leave you behind, start fresh. Ruth felt the world tilt. Thomas had been planning to abandon her, had believed the curse stories, had blamed her for things she couldn't control. But you took care of that, didn't you? Fletcher continued. Fixed it so he couldn't leave. Fixed it permanent. No, I didn't. I wouldn't. Tell it to the judge. Trial's set for next week. And Ruth. This town wants justice. They want someone to pay for those 6 dead men, and you're the only one left to pay. He left. Ruth sank onto the cot, her mind reeling. Thomas had been going to leave her, had thought her cursed, had blamed her for his failures. She'd mourned a man who'd stopped loving her long before he died. The realization was crushing. Not because she'd loved him. She'd barely known him by the end, had married too young to a man too weak. But because it meant she'd been grieving a lie. Carrying guilt for a man who'd already abandoned her in his heart. Ruth laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again, because what else was there to do? She was accused of murdering a husband who'd been planning to leave her. Was chained in a cell in a town that wanted her dead. Had left behind a man who actually loved her and a daughter who needed her. And there was absolutely nothing she could do about any of it. The week before trial passed in a blur of interrogations, hostile visitors, and crushing loneliness. Fletcher came every day with new accusations. Other townspeople came to gawk, to spit, to call her witch and murderer, and worse. Ruth stopped responding. Stopped defending herself. What was the point? They'd already decided she was guilty. On the 6th day, Judge Blackwell arrived. Ruth didn't stand when he entered, didn't acknowledge him. Mrs. Winslow, she finally looked up. Come to gloat? No, I came to offer help. Ruth laughed bitterly. You're the reason I'm here. I'm the reason you're getting a fair trial instead of a lynch mob. Fletcher and his men wanted to handle this their own way. I convinced them to follow the law. How noble. Blackwell pulled up a chair, sat facing her cell. I don't think you killed your husband, for what it's worth. Then why am I here? Because this town needs closure, needs someone to blame. And you're convenient. He leaned forward. But Ruth, there's a way out of this. She waited. Plead guilty to negligence, not murder. Admit you distracted Thomas, caused him to be careless, but didn't intend his death. You'll get 5 years, maybe less, with good behavior. And you'll live. And if I plead innocent, then you go to trial. And Fletcher has 3 witnesses who'll swear they saw you tampering with the beams. You'll hang. Ruth's chest tightened. Those witnesses are lying. Probably. But can you prove it? Can you afford lawyers good enough to break their testimony? Can you survive a trial where everyone in town wants you dead? She couldn't. She knew she couldn't. 5 years, Blackwell repeated. You'd be out when hope is still young enough to remember you. You could rebuild your life. Start over somewhere new. And Grant? Grant will move on. Find someone more suitable. Someone without your history. Ruth's hands clenched. He wouldn't. He would. Men always do. They mourn, they grieve, they move on. And you'll be locked away watching him forget you through prison bars. The words were designed to hurt. They worked. But Ruth had learned something in these 6 months of hell. She'd learned she was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. No, she said. Ruth, I said no. I won't plead guilty to something I didn't do. I won't give this town the satisfaction. If they want to hang me, they'll have to look me in the eye while they do it. Blackwell sighed. You're throwing your life away. Maybe, but it's my life to throw. He stood, moved toward the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, Judge. You should know that better than anyone. He left. Ruth sat in the gathering darkness and tried to figure out how to survive what was coming. The night before trial, Ruth couldn't sleep. She paced her cell, counting steps, trying to keep her mind from spiraling into panic. Tomorrow she'd stand before a jury of people who'd already decided her fate. Tomorrow, she'd defend herself against lies she couldn't prove false. Tomorrow she might die. Hope would grow up without a mother. Grant would mourn and move on. And Ruth would be forgotten, just another woman crushed by a system that valued men's words over women's lives. Footsteps in the hallway made her stop. Too late for visitors, too quiet for the marshal. A figure appeared in the shadows. Ruth's breath caught. Grant. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, his clothes dusty from hard riding. But he was here. How did you? Bribed the marshal. Told him I was your husband, needed to say goodbye. Grant moved to the bars, his hands wrapping around them like he could tear them apart through will alone. Ruth, You shouldn't be here. If they find out, I don't care. I couldn't. I can't let you face tomorrow alone. Ruth moved closer, close enough to touch his hands through the bars. Grant, I need to tell you something. About Thomas. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Because if tomorrow goes wrong, I need you to know the truth. She took a shaky breath. Thomas was going to leave me, before he died. He believed I was cursed, believed I was ruining his life. The foreman told me. And Grant, I spent 2 years grieving a man who'd already abandoned me in his heart. Grant's expression was anguished. Ruth. I didn't kill him, but I can't prove I didn't. And tomorrow, they're going to hang me anyway because this town needs someone to blame, and I'm easy to sacrifice. No, I won't let them. You can't stop it. You can't save me this time. Grant's grip tightened on the bars until his knuckles went white. Then I'll testify. I'll tell them you're innocent. You'll what? Tell them you've known me 4 months. That won't convince anyone. Grant, you have to accept. No. His voice broke. I don't accept. I won't. Ruth, you're the first person since Anna died who made me remember what living feels like. You walk into my life broken and desperate, and you somehow fix me. You make me better. You make me brave. And I ain't losing that. I ain't losing you. Ruth's vision blurred. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice. Always. Grant pulled something from his pocket. I brought this, in case I never get another chance. He slipped it through the bars. A ring. Simple gold worn smooth. It was Anna's, Grant said quietly. I should have given it to you at the wedding. Should have, his voice cracked. Should have made you my wife before they took you. Ruth held the ring, felt its weight. Grant, I can't. You can. Please. Even if tomorrow, even if the worst happens, I need you to wear it. I need you to know you were loved. Really loved. Not by a man who planned to leave. By a man who would burn down the world to keep you safe. Ruth slipped the ring on her finger. It fit perfectly. Where you go, I go, Grant whispered. Remember, that's the promise. And if tomorrow goes wrong, then I'll follow you. Somehow. Because a life without you ain't a life I want. Don't say that. Don't grant you have to live. For Hope. She needs you. She needs her mother more. They stood there, hands touching through iron bars, two people who'd found each other too late and loved each other too much. I'm not giving up, Grant said fiercely. I'm going to find a way to save you. I'm going to— Just love me, Ruth interrupted. That's enough. Just love me even if it's only for tonight. That's all I need. Grant pulled her as close as the bars allowed, kissed her through the gaps, held her like he could keep her safe through sheer determination. I love you, he said against her hair. I love you, Ruth Winslow, and tomorrow I'm going to prove it. Morning came too soon. Ruth was led to the courthouse in chains, flanked by marshals. The streets of Coppertown were packed, people pushing, shouting, calling for her death. She kept her head up, kept walking, kept breathing. The courtroom was standing room only. Ruth saw Grant in the front row, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Saw Fletcher smirking. Saw the three witnesses who would testify against her, all minors, all loyal to Fletcher, all willing to lie. The judge, an elderly man named Harrison, banged his gavel. Order. This court is now in session. The prosecutor stood, a thin man with ambitious eyes. Your Honor, the territory calls Fletcher Davis to the stand. Fletcher swore, his oath settled into his seat. Mr. Davis, please tell the court what you witnessed on the day of the mine collapse. I saw Mrs. Winslow near the support beams in Tunnel 4. Saw her touching something. When I called out, she ran. Lie. Ruth wanted to scream it, but she stayed quiet. And did you see what she did? She loosened the support bolts. I'm certain of it. Those beams were inspected that morning, were solid. But after she left, they failed. 6 men died. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Ruth's lawyer, a young man appointed by the court, clearly terrified, stood. Objection. Speculation. Overruled. The witness is testifying to what he saw. The pattern continued. 3 witnesses, all claiming they saw Ruth near the beams, all claiming she looked guilty, suspicious, like she knew exactly what she was doing. All of them lying, all of them convincing. Ruth's lawyer tried. He cross-examined weakly, poked gentle holes in their testimony. But he was outmatched, overwhelmed, defeated before he started. Then the prosecutor rested. Ruth's lawyer called his only witness, Grant. Grant took the stand, his eyes never leaving Ruth's face. State your name for the record. Grant McCoy. Mr. McCoy, how do you know the defendant? She's the woman I was going to marry, the woman I love, the woman I know is innocent. And how long have you known her? 4 months. 4 months. The prosecutor smiled. And in those 4 months, did Mrs. Winslow ever mention her husband's death? Yes. Did she ever express guilt? She felt guilty for surviving. But that ain't the same as being guilty of murder. Did she ever tell you about being at the mine the day before the collapse? Grant hesitated. Yes. She said she got lost looking for Thomas. Lost. In a mine where she'd visited dozens of times. The prosecutor turned to the jury. Or perhaps she knew exactly where she was going, exactly what she was doing. That's not— Grant started. Thank you, Mr. McCoy. No further questions. Grant looked at Ruth, his expression desperate. I'm sorry, he mouthed. Ruth shook her head. It wasn't his fault. Nothing was his fault. The prosecutor stood for closing arguments. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. Ruth Winslow, a woman known to be cursed, a woman whose husband was planning to leave her, took matters into her own hands. She sabotaged those beams. She killed 6 men. And now she must pay. Ruth's lawyer stood, stammered, through a weak defense, sat down defeated. The jury deliberated for 20 minutes. Guilty. The word fell like an axe. Ruth heard Grant shout, heard him try to rush the bench, heard the marshals restraining him. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. Ruth Winslow, you have been found guilty of murder. I hereby sentence you to death by hanging, sentence to be carried out at dawn tomorrow. Tomorrow. Not even time to breathe, to think, to say goodbye. Ruth was dragged from the courtroom. The last thing she saw was Grant's face twisted with anguish and rage as he fought against the men holding him back. Then, darkness. Then a cell. Then the terrible realization that she had less than 12 hours to live. Night fell, and Ruth sat in her cell. Anna's ring on her finger, Hope's face in her mind, Grant's love in her heart. She'd survived so much. The road, the cold, the judgment, the fear. But she couldn't survive this. Tomorrow at dawn, Ruth Winslow would hang for a crime she didn't commit. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Ruth didn't sleep. She sat on the cot, Anna's ring catching what little moonlight filtered through the barred window, and tried to memorize everything good she'd ever felt. Grant's hands teaching her to plane wood. Hope's laugh when she discovered her own toes. The smell of bread baking. The weight of being chosen. She wanted those memories to be the last things in her mind when the rope tightened. Footsteps approached near midnight. Ruth didn't look up. Probably the marshal checking to make sure she hadn't found some way to cheat the noose. Ruth! Her head snapped up. Grant stood outside her cell, but he wasn't alone. Sheriff Briggs was with him, keys in hand, and behind them Martha Doyle, Mrs. Mitchell, and someone Ruth didn't recognize. A thin man with ink-stained fingers and nervous eyes. "What are you—" Grant's expression was fierce, desperate, alive. "We're getting you out." "Grant, you can't. If you help me escape, they'll hunt us both." "We're not escaping," Sheriff Briggs interrupted. He unlocked the cell door, pulled it open. "We're proving you're innocent. But we got maybe 6 hours before dawn, so we need you to move fast and talk faster." Ruth stumbled out of the cell, her legs unsteady. "I don't understand." The thin man stepped forward, clutching papers against his chest. "I'm William Porter. I worked for the mining company, keeping records, and I found something." He spread papers on the marshal's desk with shaking hands. Diagrams, inspection reports, numbers that meant nothing to Ruth, but clearly meant everything to him. The beams in Tunnel 4 were flagged 3 weeks before the collapse. Inspector noted stress fractures, recommended immediate replacement, but Fletcher Davis overrode the recommendation, said it would cost too much slow production. He ordered the men to keep working. Ruth's breath caught. He knew the beams were failing. He knew. And when they collapsed, he needed someone to blame, someone who couldn't defend themselves, someone the town already hated. Porter's voice strengthened. "He picked you. Convinced 3 men to lie in exchange for keeping their jobs. Threatened them with dismissal if they didn't testify against you." Grant's hand found Ruth's shoulder, steadied her. "Porter came to me this afternoon, after the trial. Said he couldn't live with himself if he stayed quiet." "Why didn't you testify?" Ruth asked Porter. "Why didn't you tell the court?" Porter's face crumpled. "Because I'm a coward. Because Fletcher threatened my family. Because I thought maybe they'd just sentence you to prison, not hanging. But when the judge said dawn..." He pressed his fist against his mouth. "I couldn't. I just couldn't." Martha grabbed Ruth's arm. "We're going to Judge Harrison. Now. Tonight. We're waking that old bastard up and shoving these papers in his face until he listens." "It's the middle of the night," Ruth protested. "He won't." "He will," Sheriff Briggs said grimly. "Because if he doesn't, I'm arresting Fletcher Davis right now on suspicion of negligent homicide. And that'll cause enough scandal to make Harrison's political career very uncomfortable. He'll listen." Mrs. Mitchell wrapped a shawl around Ruth's shoulders. "Come on, girl. We ain't got time for questions. Dawn's coming whether we're ready or not." They moved as a group through Coppertown's empty streets. Ruth felt exposed, vulnerable, certain that at any moment someone would see them and raise the alarm. But the town slept on, oblivious to the mercy unfolding in its shadows. Judge Harrison lived in a large house on the edge of town. Sheriff Briggs pounded on the door until lights flickered on inside. Harrison appeared in his nightshirt, furious and disoriented. "What in God's name?" "We got new evidence," Briggs said. "Evidence that proves Ruth Winslow is innocent, and you're going to look at it right now." "Sheriff, it's the middle of the night. This is highly—" "A woman is going to hang at dawn for a crime she didn't commit. You really want that on your conscience? Or do you want to be remembered as the judge who killed an innocent woman because he couldn't be bothered to look at evidence?" Harrison's expression shifted. He saw the papers in Porter's hands, saw the desperation in their faces, saw something that made him step aside. "Come in, but this better be substantial." They crowded into his study. Porter spread the documents across Harrison's desk, explained everything with growing confidence: the inspection reports, the ignored warnings, Fletcher's cover-up. Harrison read in silence, his face growing darker with each page. "These are certified mining company documents," he finally said, "signed by company inspectors." "Yes, sir." "And you're willing to testify to their authenticity?" Porter swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Even if it costs me my job, even if Fletcher comes after me. I'm willing." Harrison looked at Ruth. "Mrs. Winslow, did you tamper with those support beams?" "No, sir. I swear on my daughter's life I didn't." "Did you even know they were compromised?" "I didn't know anything about mining. I was just trying to find my husband." Harrison leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes briefly. "If I overturn this verdict, Fletcher Davis will be ruined. The mining company will face lawsuits. Coppertown's economy depends on that mine. This will cause chaos." "Justice usually does," Martha said sharply. "But that don't make it wrong." Harrison opened his eyes, looked at each of them in turn. "You realize if I do this, I'm making powerful enemies. The mining company will see that I never get appointed to territorial judge. Fletcher has connections. This could destroy my career." "Then maybe your career ain't worth keeping," Grant said. "If it costs an innocent woman's life." The words hung in the air. Harrison stared at Grant for a long moment. "You love her, this woman, more than my own life. Enough to throw away everything you've built." "Already tried to. She wouldn't let me. But yes, 1,000 times yes." Harrison stood slowly. "I had a daughter once. She died young, fever. But before she died, she made me promise something. Made me promise I'd always do the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it cost me." He gathered the papers. "I'll issue an emergency stay of execution at dawn, and I'll order Fletcher Davis arrested for obstruction of justice and negligent homicide. The trial verdict is overturned pending further investigation." Ruth's knees buckled. Grant caught her, held her up. "You're free," Harrison said quietly. "Or you will be once I file the paperwork at the courthouse. But Mrs. Winslow—" His expression was grave. "You should leave Coppertown as soon as possible. Fletcher has allies, men who won't care about legal niceties if they decide to take justice into their own hands." "We'll leave tonight," Grant said. "Soon as the papers are signed." "Good." Harrison moved toward the door, paused. "And Mrs. Winslow, I'm sorry for not questioning the evidence sooner, for nearly making an irreversible mistake. I'll have to live with that." "You stopped it," Ruth whispered. "That's what matters. You stopped it." They walked to the courthouse as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. Harrison filed the necessary documents, his pen scratching in the pre-dawn quiet. Ruth kept expecting something to go wrong, kept waiting for Fletcher to burst through the door with a mob, for the marshal to refuse the order, for the world to remember that women like her didn't get happy endings. But the papers were signed. The stay was issued. And when Harrison handed Ruth the official release document, his expression was almost gentle. "Go, before anyone realizes what's happened. And Mrs. Winslow, don't come back to Coppertown. There's nothing for you here but bad memories." "No argument from me, Your Honor." Outside, the sky was lightening. Ruth stood in the street, breathing free air, feeling the weight of the noose that would never tighten. Grant wrapped his arms around her from behind his face, pressed against her hair. "You're alive. God, Ruth, you're alive. She turned in his embrace, saw tears tracking down his face. You saved me. We saved each other. That's what we do. Sheriff Briggs cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt, but y'all need to ride. Fletcher will hear about this soon as the town wakes up, and he ain't gonna accept it quietly. What about you? Ruth asked. Won't he come after you too? Briggs smiled grimly. Let him try. I'm the law in this town. And now I got enough evidence to keep him in jail long enough to cool his temper. He tipped his hat. Go on now. Get back to that baby of yours. She needs her mother. Martha hugged Ruth hard. You're tougher than iron, girl. Don't ever forget that. Mrs. Mitchell pressed a bundle into Ruth's hands. Food for the journey, and a letter of reference in case you need work somewhere new, though I suspect Mr. McCoy won't be letting you work much anymore. She works if she wants to, Grant interjected. I ain't marrying her to cage her. You're not married yet, Ruth pointed out. Then we fix that today, soon as we're far enough from Coppertown that they can't drag you back. Porter stepped forward last, his thin face nervous but determined. Mrs. Winslow, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I was afraid. But watching you stand up to them even when you knew you'd hang it made me realize being afraid was worse than being brave. Ruth took his hand. You spoke up when it mattered. That's all anyone can ask. They rode out of Coppertown as the sun broke over the mountains, painting everything gold and new. Ruth sat in front of Grant on his horse, his arms secure around her, and let herself believe, finally, really believe that she might actually survive this. They rode hard for 2 hours before Grant finally slowed the horse near a creek. We should rest. Water the horse. Make sure no one's following. Ruth slid down her legs, trembling. The adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Grant dismounted, checked the trail behind them. Satisfied they were alone, he turned to Ruth. You need to eat, sleep. You've been through... Ruth grabbed his shirt, pulled him down, kissed him hard. Kissed him like she was still proving she was alive, still tasting freedom, still shocked that she got to keep breathing. When they finally broke apart, Grant's eyes were wet. I thought I lost you. When that verdict came down, I thought... I know, I thought the same thing. Ruth, I can't. His voice broke. I can't go through that again. Can't watch you almost die. Can't stand at your grave wondering what I could have done different. Then don't let me go, ever. Just hold on, and don't let go. That's the plan. That's always been the plan. They held each other by the creek, two people who'd walked through hell and somehow found their way back to each other. We should keep moving, Ruth finally said. Get as far from Coppertown as possible before Fletcher realizes what happened. One more thing first. Grant pulled something from his saddlebag, a worn Bible, Anna's Bible. I've been carrying this, practicing the words, just in case. He stopped, started again. Just in case I got another chance to do this right. He opened the Bible to a marked page. Ruth, I know we ain't in a church. Don't have witnesses or fancy clothes or any of the proper trappings. But I don't care about proper anymore. I care about you, about us, about making this real before anything else can go wrong. He took her hand. So right here with God and the mountains as witness, I'm asking you again, marry me. Let me be your husband. Let me spend every day proving you made the right choice. Ruth's throat tightened. You really want to do this here now? Been waiting 4 months to call you my wife. Don't want to wait one more minute. We need someone to perform the ceremony. Don't we, though? A voice called from the trees. They spun around. Reverend Silas stepped into the clearing, his horse tied nearby, his expression tired but peaceful. Reverend... Grant's hand went to his gun. What are you... Relax. I'm not here to stop you. Silas moved closer. I heard what happened, heard about the evidence, the stay of execution, heard you were riding out, and I thought maybe you'd want someone to make this official, legal, binding. Ruth stared. You followed us. I did. Because I owe you an apology, Mrs. Winslow. I stood with the men who wanted you gone, who judged you without knowing you, who let fear of scandal override mercy, and I was wrong. He pulled out his Bible. I can't undo what I did, but I can do this. I can marry you proper in the eyes of God, so nobody, not Fletcher, not Judge Blackwell, not anyone can say this union isn't legitimate. Grant looked at Ruth. It's your choice. Always your choice. Ruth studied Silas, saw genuine remorse in his expression. Saw a man trying to make amends the only way he knew how. All right, she said, but make it quick. We got a long ride ahead. Silas smiled. The best weddings usually are quick. It's the marriage that takes a lifetime. He opened his Bible, found the passage. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God and nature to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The words were familiar, traditional, but they sounded different out here, away from judgment, away from crowds, away from everything except the two people who mattered. Grant McCoy, do you take Ruth Winslow to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health till death do you part? I do. God, I do. And Ruth Winslow, do you take Grant McCoy to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health till death do you part? Ruth looked at this man who'd saved her, fought for her, refused to let her face the world alone. This man who'd taught her what it meant to be chosen. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Silas closed his Bible. Grant, you may kiss your bride. Grant pulled Ruth close, kissed her with the desperate joy of someone who'd almost lost everything and got it back anyway. When they broke apart, both were crying. Go, Silas said softly, before the world catches up, and be happy. That's the best revenge against people who wanted you to fail. They rode away from that creek, married, legal, bound together in ways that couldn't be undone. Ruth kept touching Anna's ring on her finger, kept reminding herself this was real. She was Mrs. Grant McCoy. She had a husband who loved her, a daughter waiting for her, a future that didn't end with a rope. They reached Silver Ridge 3 days later, exhausted and triumphant. Mrs. Mitchell met them at the edge of town, Hope in her arms. The baby saw Ruth and shrieked with joy, reaching out with fat hands. Ruth took her daughter, held her so tight, Hope squeaked in protest. I'm here, baby girl. Mama's here. I'm never leaving you again. Grant wrapped his arms around them both. His family. Finally, completely, impossibly his. The town turned out to see them return. Some faces were welcoming. Some were still skeptical. But Ruth didn't care anymore what people thought. She'd survived the worst they could throw at her. She'd walked through fire and came out whole. She was done letting other people's judgment define her worth. Martha pushed through the crowd, grinning. Well, well, the widow who wouldn't die. You're gonna be a legend in these parts. Don't want to be a legend, just want to be left alone. Too late for that. But Ruth... Martha's expression softened. You earned your peace. Time to claim it. They walked to the cabin together, Grant, Ruth, Hope, and a handful of people who'd chosen mercy over judgment. The cabin looked exactly as Ruth remembered, but it felt different now. It felt like home. Not borrowed, not temporary. Home. That night, after Hope was asleep in her cradle, after the well-wishers had left, Grant and Ruth sat by the fire. What now? Ruth asked. Now we live, we build, we fight when we need to, and rest when we can. We raise Hope, and maybe give her brothers and sisters. We grow old together if we're lucky. What if more trouble comes? Then we face it, together. Grant took her hand. Ruth, we survived a blizzard, a fever, a trial, and a near execution. I figure we can survive just about anything now. Ruth leaned against him, felt his heartbeat steady and sure. Where you go, I go. Where you stay, I stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. They sat in the firelight speaking the words Ruth had once read from Anna's Bible. Words that had become their promise, their vow, their truth. Outside, spring was coming. The snow was melting. Flowers would bloom soon in the same spots where Anna had planted them years ago. And Ruth would tend them, honoring the woman who'd come before, while building the life that came after. 2 plates sat on the shelf now, both worn from use. The rocking chair finally held someone who rocked. Anna's shawl smelled like Ruth and baby powder and hope. The cabin had stopped being a tomb and become a home. Not because Anna was forgotten, she never would be, but because Grant had learned that love wasn't a limited resource. Loving Ruth didn't diminish what he'd felt for Anna. It honored it. It proved that Anna's belief in mercy and second chances had been right all along. Grant pulled Ruth closer, kissed the top of her head. Thank you. For what? For walking into that crossroads. For being brave when I was a coward. For teaching me that love is stronger than fear. You taught me the same thing. We're even. Then let's stay even. For the rest of our lives. Ruth smiled against his chest. Deal. They sat there until the fire burned down to embers, 2 broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, 2 lost souls who'd finally found their way home. Hope stirred in her cradle, made a soft sound, settled back into sleep. She'd grow up in this cabin surrounded by love and stories of survival. She'd learn that her mother was the strongest person alive, that her father was brave when it mattered most, that family wasn't just blood, it was choice. Morning came gentle and gold. Ruth woke in Grant's arms, in their bed, in their home. She heard Hope babbling in the next room, heard Grant's steady breathing, heard the quiet sounds of a life well lived. She got up, started the fire, put coffee on to boil. Grant emerged sleep-rumpled and content, and pulled her into his arms. Morning, Mrs. McCoy. Morning, Mr. McCoy. They stood in their kitchen, holding each other, while Hope demanded breakfast and the coffee boiled over and ordinary life unfolded around them. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was imperfect. It was everything. 6 months later, Ruth planted wildflowers along the front path, the same kind Anna had loved. They bloomed in purple and yellow and white, a riot of color against Montana's harsh landscape. Grant built a new room for Hope, who was walking now, getting into everything, filling the cabin with noise and laughter and life. The town had slowly, grudgingly accepted them. Some people would always whisper. Some would always judge. But enough had chosen mercy that Ruth and Grant could walk into Silver Ridge without fear. Judge Blackwell had left town, his reputation in tatters after the truth about Fletcher's cover-up spread. Fletcher himself was in territorial prison serving 20 years for negligent homicide. The 3 men who'd testified against Ruth had recanted, begged forgiveness. Ruth had given it not for them, but for herself. Carrying hate was too heavy. Sheriff Briggs stopped by monthly, always bringing candy for Hope, always checking that Ruth and Grant were doing well. He'd become a friend, the kind forged in crisis and tested by time. Martha Doyle had become Ruth's closest confidant, teaching her the subtle arts of frontier survival, which women to trust, which men to avoid, how to make a life in a land that didn't want women to thrive. And every night Grant read to Ruth from Anna's Bible. He'd gotten better at it, the words flowing smoother now. And Ruth would listen, one hand on Hope's cradle, one hand in Grant's, feeling blessed and grateful and whole. One evening, as Ruth rocked Hope to sleep, Grant came in with something wrapped in cloth. Made you something. Ruth unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers and mountains. For your memories, Grant said quietly. All the good ones we're gonna make. I figure we fill this box with little things, pressed flowers, notes, Hope's first lost tooth, so when we're old we can open it and remember. Ruth's eyes filled. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. The life we're building is beautiful. and I want to remember every moment." He opened the box. Inside was a single item, the pressed wildflower that had fallen from Anna's Bible. The one Grant had carried for 2 years, the one he'd given Ruth in Coppertown when he asked her to marry him. "Anna's flower," Ruth whispered. "Anna's flower. Because she's part of this story too. Part of what brought us together." Grant touched the flower gently. "I used to think loving you meant forgetting her. But it don't. Loving you means honoring what she taught me. Means being brave enough to open my heart again, even after it's shattered." Ruth placed the flower back in the box carefully. "Then let's fill this box. Let's make so many memories we need a second box, and a third. And when we're old and gray, and sitting on this porch watching our grandchildren play, we'll open these boxes and remember. We'll tell them about crossroads and blizzards and false accusations. We'll tell them about choosing courage over fear. We'll tell them that love, real love, is worth fighting for." Grant pulled her close. "I love you, Ruth McCoy." "I love you, Grant McCoy." They stood on their porch as the sun set over Montana's mountains, the wildflowers blooming at their feet, their daughter asleep inside their future stretching out before them like an open road. Ruth had been lost once, standing at a crossroads with nowhere to go and no reason to hope. She'd been broken, desperate, dying. But Grant had found her, had chosen her, had proven that some men kept their promises even when the world told them not to. And Ruth had found herself, had discovered she was stronger than any curse, braver than any fear, worthier than any judgment. They'd built this life from nothing, from snow and heartbreak and stubborn refusal to surrender. They'd built it with calloused hands and merciful hearts and love that refused to quit. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Montana never promised easy, but it promised possibility. It promised that people who'd survived the worst could build something beautiful from the wreckage. Ruth looked at the mountains, at the cabin, at the man beside her, at the life they'd fought for and won. She was home. Finally, completely, impossibly home. And this time nothing, not judgment, not fear, not the whole cruel world would take it away. They'd survived the crossroads. They'd chosen each other. And that choice, made again and again every single day, was what love really meant. Not perfection, not ease, just choosing. Every morning, every challenge, every moment that tested whether they really meant their vows. And they did. God help them, they did. So Ruth Winslow, Ruth McCoy, now who'd once whispered she was lost to a stranger at a crossroads, stood on her porch beside her husband and knew with absolute certainty she'd been found. Not by luck, not by chance, by choice, by courage, by love that refused to let go even when letting go would have been easier. The widow who'd collapsed in snow had become the woman who stood tall. The baby who'd nearly died had become the daughter who thrived. The broken cowboy had become the man who kept his promises. They'd walked through hell. They'd survived. They'd built heaven from the ashes. And that, Ruth thought as Grant's hand found hers in the gathering dark, was the only ending that mattered. Not happy ever after, because life didn't work that way. But choosing ever after. Fighting ever after. Loving ever after. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One moment of courage at a time. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.